Korea's busiest crossroads is in Seoul's district of Gangnam, near Sensa Station. Those driving down the Hanam Bridge over the Han River into Gangnam will pass through this crossroads before heading to different parts of the district, like Nonhaeyeon, Cheongdam, or Pukchong. When there's a lot of traffic, drivers might be staring up at the traffic lights for tens of minutes, waiting for their turn, which is why the subway is probably the best way to get to Sensa Station, if that's your destination. But if your destination is specifically somewhere near exit 1 of Sensa Station, that's a slightly different story. For example, if you happen to be heading for the Cheonggu building, which in 2010 housed Big Hit Entertainment, later known as HYBE, Seoul, Gangnam-gu, Dosindero 16 Gil 13-20. Even with the address, it's not easy to find the Cheonggu building if you have never been to Gangnam or the Sensa Station crossroads. According to the Kakao Map app, the distance between this building and exit 1 is 568 meters. But it's impossible to tell from the map that the building is near the end of a steep incline, nor that several pivots along the way are necessary in order to reach it. Unless you're driving there with the aid of GPS navigation, it could be a bit of an effort and wandering around to find Cheonggu building. I was at a loss. Such was the case for Myeongseok, who would debut 3 years later as J-Hope of BTS. After signing a trainee contract with Big Hit Entertainment in April 2010, he was undergoing training in his native city of Gwangju when the company ordered him to move into the Big Hit Entertainment trainee dormitory near the Cheonggu building in Seoul. He arrived on December 24, 2010. I was so scared. It was Christmas Eve and the streets were full of cheerful people, but I couldn't get my bearings at all. Never had he ridden the Seoul subway or experienced Christmas Eve in trendy Sinsadong. This was an area with high foot traffic, even for Seoul, but the elusive location of the dormitory was as intimidating to J-Hope as the crowded subway or the unfamiliar vista of the Sinsa neighborhood. I kept saying, "This is frustrating," and ended up calling the then head of A&R. "So, how do I get there?" After his call, he kept going straight, and like, somehow to use his words, and finally arrived at the dorm. This was the beginning of his dorm life, which he had been looking forward to since the day before and which he still remembered vividly 10 years later. On that day, however, he was in for a shock. Suga was there in his underwear, laughs. There were leftover trotters in the sink, laundry strewn on the floor, and everyone walking around in their underwear. I guess this is dorm life? I thought. Big Hit Entertainment about a month and a half before this, in the beginning of November, Min Yoonji, who would debut as Suga of BTS, had arrived at Sensa Station Exit 1, just as J-Hope would, and was looking for the dorm. My parents dropped me off. There's a practice studio in the basement of Jong restaurant near the Cheonggu building. I stood there until PDOGG came out and took me inside. My parents told me later that I looked like I was being dragged off somewhere. Laughs. Suga was 17 years old at the time. He was a bit too young to leave his hometown of Daegu to come up to Seoul just because he wanted a career in music. But in Korea, it is difficult to grow into a mainstream artist if one doesn't happen to be in Seoul. I was in a dance crew in Daegu, and there was a studio I worked in, but the pie was just too small. We might have an event gig from time to time. Sometimes we were paid in tickets for our performances, not money. Not that we were doing it for the money necessarily, but I wonder if we should have at least been paid enough to buy a meal, and a lot of times we weren't paid even that. By the time Suga entered Big Hit Entertainment, he was already a paid songwriter working in Daegu. He attended music hagwons to learn MIDI, was introduced to composers, and went from studio to studio doing all kinds of work. Back then, there was no arts high school that taught mainstream music in Daegu, which was why for a time he studied classical music with an eye on entering arts high school that way. He learned different kinds of music from various musicians, composing everything from school songs to trot. But for a teenager dreaming of a career as a professional musician, especially a teenager obsessed with hip-hop, his prospects outside of Seoul were slim. Hip-hop wasn't very mainstream in Daegu at the time. This was when people made fun of rappers, calling them hip-hop warriors, and when the Hangsa made music with did cyphers one in the park, we'd get maybe 20 people as an audience. And our first one had 2 people. It was a fairly reasonable choice for Suga to head to Seoul, in retrospect. Indeed, Suga and J-Hope had deliberately made the decision to enter the idol audition process before joining Big Hit Entertainment as trainees. J-Hope had undertaken auditions with other companies and already had specific dreams of debuting as a singer by the time his dance Haegwon recommended him for an audition with Big Hit. As Korean idol groups became explosively popular in the 2000s, not only domestically but internationally, teenagers aspiring to stardom flocked to famous dance Haegwons that not only taught dance but also introduced promising students to entertainment companies in Seoul. This was also how J-Hope's initial training was outsourced to Gwangju before he entered the dorm in Seoul. The Big Hit A&R people came to Gwangju and sat in on the auditions in person. I danced for them, and then did 8 months of outsourced training after I succeeded in the audition. Once a month during this training, I made videos of myself dancing and singing to send to the company. Meanwhile, Suga, who was already a professional songwriter, became interested in a particular person at Big Hit Entertainment. I always liked the songwriter Bang Si-hyuk. I really liked the T-Era song like the first time, and learned that Bang had written that song. He wasn't on television or anything back then, but he was already famous as a songwriter among people in the know. For teenagers with limited insider knowledge of the entertainment industry, trusting a company recommended by one's dance Haegwon or taking an audition because a favorite songwriter happened to work there was the best course of action. Even before the incredible success of today's BTS, Big Hit Entertainment in 2010 was already a well-respected company, more than worthy to be a young musician's dream company. Bang Si-hyuk, the current chair of HYBE, established Big Hit in 2005, and by the time Chop and Suga had signed on, he had raised a string of successful artists like 88, J-Lim, and 2AM to stardom. 2AM's Can't Let You Go Even If I Die in particular, composed by Bang, was a massive hit that rocketed the team to supremacy. Big Hit Entertainment was hardly small fry in the scheme of things, with a stable of successful artists and the owner and main producer of the company well known for his ability to consistently crank out hits. But the team Big Hit was trying to build at the time with trainees like Suga and J-Hope, the team that would become BTS, was proving to be something of a new challenge for Bang Si-hyuk. The making of a K-pop idol group is like the production of a Hollywood blockbuster. Everything converges into a single effort, including capital, planning, advertising and PR, and even the brand value of the company itself. In spite of this, the industry was so competitive that only about 5 boy groups and 5 girl groups in a decade could be considered successful. Most of these popular groups came from what was known as a Big 3 SM Entertainment, YG Entertainment, and JYP Entertainment. These companies, like Hollywood's major studios, had the lion's share of capital and industry know-how. Big Hit, of course, had 2AM, but co-label JYP was the one that led the effort from training to launch. That was why for Big Hit Entertainment, the process of casting, training, and launching was a whole new venture. And it went without saying that this whole process was much more difficult and costly than simply launching a balladeer. Idol groups need simultaneous mastery of song and dance on stage, and all that singing and dancing need to be trained into them, which means enough practice space is needed to teach scores of trainees vocals and dance. For those, like Suga and J-Hope, who moved away from home, as well as whoever happens to show high potential and is therefore deemed closer to debuting, room and board need to be provided. To prepare an idol group for their debut requires not only offices for the company itself, but literal spaces for all of the above. This was why J-Hope could only be taken aback by what he saw that Christmas Eve when he first entered the dorm. Big Hit Entertainment was a major company in the entertainment industry, one that a budding artist like J-Hope could trust to nurture his talent. But in some ways, the company was arguably closer to being a kind of startup, with administrative offices and recording studios in cramped quarters on the second floor. Myeongseok used one of those tiny rooms for his artistic and administrative work, including meetings. It was so small that there was room for no more than 3 people, and that third person would have to sit on the floor. Instead of bringing all the trainees into the same building, Bang rented practice space and accommodations around the Myeongseok building. These spaces, like their offices, were only just enough for their most basic functions, which is apparent when contrasting Jungkook's practice footage from February 2013 with the BTS dance footage filmed in the HYBE headquarters. In 2013, Big Hit clearly had everything they needed and more for a company of their size. But compared to the big three, they might as well have had nothing. One thing Big Hit had a disproportionate abundance of was people. Take the trainees, for instance. There were about 15 male trainees vying to become BTS. At one point, there had been 20 trainees competing to join the girl group Clan, which debuted a year before BTS. And importantly, Big Hit also had the producer and content creator Bang Si-hyuk, the producer PDOGG, and the performance director's son Sungduk. But for the 2 teenagers who had come up to Seoul from Daegu and Gwangju, the first thing that made a big impression, like Suka's comment about moving into the dorm, was the fact that there were a whole lot of other teens their age with similar interests. Suga remembers, "I went to the recording studio and RM and Supreme Boy were there, and other trainees, and we got all excited just talking about music." Rapta and RM, too, who would become the leader of BTS, spent his teens as Kim Namjoon in the city of Ilsan, Gyeonggi Province. He remembers the municipality as a city where everything was satisfying. The city was so well planned when it was built, and all the green spaces had an emotionally calming effect. The city was home to the Ilsan Lake Park, which was easily accessible to anyone who lived in the vicinity. The residential areas were mostly apartment complexes, and there were the 2 large commercial zones, La Festa and Western Dom. The city was indeed planned out from its very founding, with impeccably arranged roads and facilities. The entire city was spacious and peaceful for most of the week, with the 2 commercial districts becoming busier and more festive from Friday night through the weekend. It's a place where there's a certain feeling of comfort. There's a little of that city gray in the bored faces of pedestrians, but there are no tall buildings or big corporate offices, which makes the sky easier to see. It is an excellent environment for concentrating on your studies. It's not the countryside, but it feels like that to me. While near Seoul, Ilsan wasn't as large or bustling as the capital, which became a factor in RM discovering hip-hop. He started going online in 1st grade and learned about rap through NAS and interviews and documentaries of hip-hop artists on YouTube, while picking up English along the way. But offline, the life of middle schooler Kim Namjoon was at somewhat of a distance from hip-hop. It was about as far as the distance between Ilsan and Seoul's Hongik University neighborhood. If Ilsan offered any advantage to hip-hop, it was the fact that Singkun and Hongga were so close. Just a bus ride away. It was my dream to perform in places like Drug or Geek Live House, which don't exist anymore, and maybe in a bigger place like Rollinga later on. That place could hold 500 people. A bus ride from Ilsan to Hongga took a little less than an hour, but if a weekend in Ilsan meant a family of 3 or 4 taking a stroll around the lake, in the park, a weekend in Hongga and Singkun meant rappers and aspiring rappers and their audiences gathering in clubs. When RM made the decision to audition with hip-hop label Big Deal Records in 2009 to become a professional rapper, it didn't mean he would simply be going back and forth on a bus between Ilsan and Hongga. It meant jumping into a world he had only seen online, a world completely different from the city he had loved so much that he said, "It's a privilege to have been born in Ilsan." Not only that, but the place where he ended up arriving wasn't Hongga but Gangnam. I made the first cut, so in my second audition I got to perform with artists who had debuted, but I messed up the words. I thought it was over for me, but interestingly enough, a friend of the rapper Sleepy of the hip-hop duo Untouchable happened to come to the after-party for the audition, and he mentioned that Sleepy had been interested in RM's work recently and took his phone number. Sleepy said he'd seen me at an audition. He must have been impressed because he talked about me and asked for me, so I gave my phone number to his friend to pass on to him. That's how we wrote emails to each other. Sleepy happened to be old friends with PDOGG, and when PDOGG asked him, "Do you know any rappers who are young?" He recommended me. Then came the call featured in a common trainee's Christmas C posted on the BTS blog 4D. Pre-debut. A bumpkin from Ilsan / who made the top 1% nationwide / suddenly gets a call. During midterms, Sleepy called RM and asked, "Hey, do you know this guy named Myeongseok?" RM, who had made the top percentile in his national mock exams. Suga, who had been writing songs since he was 12 and was already a professional musician in high school. And the other trainees in the dorm, who had auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment as rappers and hip-hop fanatics. For all of them, dorm life was crucial to their development in a musical sense, especially if their music happened to be hip-hop and rap. According to J-Hope, it was a rap den, a den of rap. At the time of his audition, J-Hope did not know how to rap at all. He did raise Black Happiness for the rap portion, but he felt so dissatisfied with it that he feared he had failed his audition. To J-Hope, the happenings in the dorm must have come as quite a culture shock. He recalls, "Wow, as soon as you walk into that dorm, the kids just started freestyle rapping at you. I couldn't do any of that." Every weekend, the company filmed this rapping freestyle, but then they'd come back to the dorm and keep putting on beats and doing rap. The dorm overflowed with hip-hop, with impromptu sing-alongs to songs like Wiz Khalifa's Black and Yellow going on in the middle of the night. Those dormitory days where hip-hop was work, play, and life all rolled into one for a bunch of teenagers would play an important part in the formation of BTS's identity in the coming years. On hip-hop, and the group's special bond, J-Hope would say, "You couldn't not rap in that environment. And everyone was so encouraging to me there. I asked them all sorts of stuff about rap and studied up on it and just learned a lot." Although J-Hope was a rap newbie, the beats-filled life at the dorm made him quickly fall in love with hip-hop, which also allowed him to forge new friendships with his fellow trainees. A place where rappers and this dancer who now rapped had gathered to train as professional musicians. This was what J-Hope refers to as Season 1 inch of their dorm life. Season 2 inches began with the arrival of Jungkook. Season 2 as BTS's debut began shaping up. The trainees at Big Hit Entertainment were divided into two groups. One was the high-potential group of trainees who seemed ready for their debut, and the other group was made up of trainees whose debut wasn't yet confirmed. RM, Suga, and J-Hope were in the first group. I thought, wow, I want to be there too, because I'd come here because of Rap Monster. Jungkook was famously brought on by Big Hit Entertainment in 2011 at one of the auditions for Superstar K3, a TV audition program on NIT. But the story of how a Busan middle schooler named Jeon Jungkook decided to come to Myeongseok building in Seoul is a bit more complicated than that. Jungkook had already received business cards from 7 different entertainment companies during the Superstar K3 auditions. None of them really told me why they wanted to sign me. I remember one of the companies wanted me to come to a hotel room near the Superstar K3 audition site for an audition. They wanted to get a video of me singing. The first reason Big Hit managed to beat the odds and secure Jungkook was, oddly enough, MBC's Star Audition, The Great Birth, a direct competitor to Superstar K. On that show, Myeongseok was featured as a mentor for the auditioning hopefuls. Jungkook says, "Myeongseok was famous, according to my dad, and he suggested I try going into his company." Just as RM used the internet to learn about rap artists, Jungkook searched the internet for more information on Big Hit Entertainment and learned of the rapper trainees there who were preparing for their debut, including RM, whose rap videos were available on YouTube. Jungkook says, "Hang's rap was great and his English was so impressive. I said, this is where I'll go." But when he auditioned for Superstar K3, Jungkook wasn't sure he wanted to be a singer, necessarily. Sports, art, music. I was pretty good at arts and sports, which made me think, maybe this is where my aptitude is. So as I was wondering whether to do sports or art, I thought, why not try becoming a singer? That was a job a lot of people would appreciate, so I auditioned. It wasn't exactly a joke, but I wasn't worrying myself going, what if I fail? Either. Meeting Rap Monster, whom Jungkook had gotten to know through an internet search, as well as a host of other rappers at the dorm he eventually entered, was like seeing a new world open before him. From his first day there in June 2011, it was like getting several older brothers all at once. Jungkook remembers, J-Hope would come back to the dorm really late and take out a meal from the fridge and eat it, while going, "Do you want some?" to me, and the Hines would take their new little brother everywhere. Jungkook laughs as he remembers, not long after I entered the dorm, one of the Hines played a prank on me. He claimed anyone who just moved in had to buy everyone bingsu. So I did, and we all ate it together. The three Hyeins who had gone to auditions to achieve their dreams. The little brother who went to an audition program and became a trainee after being inspired by such Hyeins. This slight generational difference foreshadowed that the world was about to change not only for Jungkook but for the rapper trainees as well. This season 2, as referred to by J-Hope, was a prelude to Idol season. To the future members of BTS, idols, along with hip-hop and their bond with each other, became another cornerstone of their identity. Each in their position. V also had a less than smooth journey from his hometown of Daegu to the Cheonggu building in the fall of 2011. We were ripped off by the cab driver. My dad and I got on and paid 38,000 won to go from Express Bus Terminal to Sinsa Station. I remember clearly that we passed 3 tunnels. 6. I still remember what the cabbie said as we got off. "Be careful, lots of people here try to force customers into premium taxis to rip you off." The moment we first entered the dorm was like arriving at a new and mysterious world. V remembers, Jungkook was at a lesson so he wasn't home, and J-Hope, RM, and Suga were there. V didn't think his expectations from before he arrived and so would change. He says, "I figured I would not be in the same team as them. The 3 of them love music and do hip-hop, and I guess I'm just someone who's only living here with them." V, a high school fresher, had become a trainee at Big Hit only 6 months after he had begun taking dance classes. Ever since he had sung on stage at his elementary talent show, he had wanted to become a performer, and he had played the saxophone since his first year in middle school with the goal of entering an arts high school. But K-pop dance was something he had learned in a hagwon over a period of 6 months. This was why he'd had no intention of auditioning when the A&M our team at Big Hit had come down to Daegu to his dance hagwon to find new trainees. Just the fact that an entertainment company would come down from Seoul was a novelty to me. So I went just to watch. They had auditioned only the kids who had gone to the hagwon for 2-3 years when at the end, one of the A&M our people pointed at me and said, "Can we see that kid dance too?" And then I got in. Around the time we entered the dorm, RM, Suga, and J-Hope were already working at a recording studio provided by Big Hit Entertainment. The 3 were already posting songs on the BTS blog before their debut, having built up enough expertise in rap, composing, and dance to hold long discussions on these subjects. Suga in particular was desperate to debut. "Father used to hate people in music, but once I passed my audition and began showing up on posters, he would brag about me a lot, which made me think I'd better debut soon. Even if I had failed to make a mark, I wanted to have debuted." In contrast, Jungkook and V only began training in vocals and dance in earnest when they joined the dorm in 2011. To V, the trio of RM, Suga, and J-Hope were already artists. V recalls, "The 3 Hyeins were so good at music, so dedicated to their work, and they seemed like experts to me. I was just happy to be a trainee by their side." Having just started as a trainee, the prospect of a debut seemed very far away to V. But just 6 months later, when Jimin came up from Busan in May 2012, the others, including V, struck him as being ready to debut immediately. Jimin recalls, "I'm very shy and I was nervous. I was trembling. I came to the dorm and there were so many shoes in the foyer, the shoes overflowed into the apartment. But even that was really cool." The Hyeins came out, and they were trainees but already looked like celebrities to me. RM in particular looked exactly as a celebrity should. and V was such a classic idol. Really handsome and wearing a red snapback cap. The older boys who did hip-hop and the boy who was the same age and looked as good as any idol. The trainees, as seen through Jimin's eyes, were already entering their idol season. Rappers who lived and died by hip-hop, the dancer who was influenced by them to write his own rap lyrics, the vocalist who was just learning to dance, and the youngest who showed potential in both song and dance. Jimin found it difficult to imagine such disparate talents ever coming together as one team. I was convinced the Haings would debut first as a hip-hop group, but Jimin's arrival was a preview of how the planning for their group would go in a different direction. If they were to become an idol group together, Jimin would join J-Hope as one of the main dancers but bring a completely different sort of flair to the team. Before he came to Seoul, Jimin had already been spending his teenagers in dance. We had an after-school breakdance club, and I remember a bunch of boys just got together and said, "Hey, do you want to try this?" Which became, "Should I really?" We gathered to practice on Saturdays when we didn't have school, and then did an actual performance. That's when I felt it, the thrill. I completely fell for dance. Jimin's main criterion for choosing a high school was also a place I can learn dance, and, hoping to become acquainted with a larger variety of dance, he specialized in contemporary dance at the Busan High School of Arts. To his parents, he explained his goals of learning dance in Busan, auditioning, and moving to Seoul. He remembers his first impressions of the capital. "I thought, well, Seoul is the same as Busan. Like, that's it?" Laughs. I had come with my father because I was transferring schools. Unfortunately, Jimin, like V, also fell victim to a taxi scammer. It might take as little as 15 minutes to get from express bus terminal to the company offices, but it took over half an hour. I'd taken a taxi because I wasn't familiar with the subway lines, and the fee came out very high. My father had gone down with me to Busan, but the day I went into the dorm, I came to Seoul alone. And that's when I first met J-Hope, who had come out to get me. "Are you Mr. Park Jimin?" Laughs. J-Hope still recalls the moment he first met Jimin. "That's how we first said hello." "Jimin? Mr. Park Jimin?" Like that. We said hello and talked on the way up to the dorm. I asked him if he danced and he said, "Yes, I did popping," and I said, "Hey, I did street dancing too. I hope we'll be able to help each other." That kind of thing. It was a somewhat awkward conversation. Laughs. It's not easy to imagine a rapper from the Hangul stage and a contemporary dance major who started out as a breakdancer making music in the same team. But approximately 8 years later in early 2020, BTS would combine elements of both disciplines in Black Swan. This melding of contrasting talents occurs sometimes in the K-pop industry, where idol groups are normally composed of a variety of positions such as rapper, dancer, and vocalist, and the members' even more diverse personalities and backgrounds become a touchstone that allows their fans to emotionally immerse themselves in their characters and music. As long as a harmonize team was formed in the first place, a team spearheaded by a group of underground rappers that included a middle schooler who had just started lessons needed more than just cohabitation to cohere into a group. They needed some form of alchemy. Trainee dorm life. I was fooled. Laughs. Jin laughs, thinking back to his casting at Big Hit Entertainment in the spring of 2011. What the worker in charge of signing him had promised him back then technically hasn't come to fruition. Jin continues, "Look at how idols these days go into acting. We'll let you become an actor eventually." That's how they convinced me. They were very persuasive. Indeed, around that time, it wasn't uncommon for a member of an idol group to also be working as an actor at the same time. While some members specialized in singing and dancing, others were more known for appearing in variety shows or dramas on television, pulling in audiences from outside the idol market. As Korea's idol market expanded with the rise of BTS's popularity and more acts began performing overseas, fewer idols ventured into acting. Jin, for one, became too busy doing stadium tours around the world with BTS, which naturally made him focus on his work as a musician. But many idols, to this day, continue to sing and act at the same time. Jin had entered university as an acting major. His interest in idol music sprung from his curiosity about artistic activities in general. I do like to try different things. I figured I'd be able to have a variety of experiences if I were an idol and an actor at the same time. Laughing, he adds, reality had other plans. Until he became a big hit entertainment trainee, Jin had a happy, fairly relaxed upbringing. Jin himself describes his childhood in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province. I could just go down to the playground and my friends would be hanging out, and if I ever wanted to talk to anyone I'd just call them up and say, "Hello, I'm such and such." All the kids in the neighborhood were friends with each other, and our parents would befriend each other as well. Walking down the street, you'd run into someone you'd say hello to every 5 or 10 minutes. Even moving from Gwacheon to Seoul didn't change his life much. Jin's parents once suggested he go to the country and try out the farm life. My parents said, "Let's try different things to see what you have an aptitude for," and that my granddad, grandma, and uncle were farmers, so why not try farming for a bit? That's how I ended up growing strawberries and melons for a month. I did so much pruning for the melons that I didn't want to eat melons for a long time. After that, laughs. Jin is the oldest member of BTS. When he signed with Big Hit Entertainment, he was 18 and in his first year of university, at the age when most Korean youth begin thinking about what they want to do with their lives. Jin says, "Since becoming a trainee, I worked hard during practice hours, but I didn't exactly stake my life on it, as they say." The future he had vaguely imagined for himself was to keep training, debut as an idol, and at some point, incorporate acting into his schedule. And so, Jin continued to go back and forth from his home to training sessions at Big Hit. But in the summer of 2012 when he entered dorm life, Jin had no choice but to change his entire lifestyle. By the time he joined the other boys at the dorm, the lineup for BTS had been decided, and that meant the content and quantity of Jin's training would change drastically. Jin thinks back to those days. "The company did not tell us we were going to debut, in so many words, but we were almost the only trainees left at the dorm at this point, which made me think, I guess it's going to happen soon." Jin also remembers his first impressions of the dorm. Sigh. Clothes strewn everywhere, cereal scattered on the floor, the dishes hadn't been done. On January 27, 2013, Jin made a posting on the BTS blog titled, "How Trainees Usually Make Tteokguk." His ambition had been to create a proper meal he could share with the other members. For example, Suga would basically just eat to live. He ate chicken breasts for protein, but even eating them was too much of a hassle for him. So he would blend it with some grape juice and a banana and gulp that down straight from the blender. I had a taste of it and thought, nope, this isn't it, and cooked up some things that I sprinkled with hot sauce or steak sauce. Before staff was hired some months later to help with the cooking and cleaning, Jin managed to coordinate the other members into taking turns with chores. As with many other people, cooking and cleaning were key activities for Jin in maintaining a semblance of a normal life. The problem was, Jin himself had to admit that they were simply getting too busy for normality. After about 3 months there, I finally realized why they had come to live the way they did. On days when we had a lot of rehearsals, we'd be working 14 hours out of a 24-hour day. School of Hip Hop Dewey Finn, played by Jack Black, the main character in the movie School of Rock, is a nameless musician who under false pretenses gets a job at an elementary school in place of a friend who is a licensed teacher. When he realizes how talented the students are, he tries to put them together into a rock band. The students, however, know nothing of rock music, and Dewey ends up teaching them the history of rock and roll during class instead of the usual curriculum. If one were to switch rock music with hip-hop, this school of hip-hop was what went on in the BTS dorm. RM created a playlist of artists including Drake, Nas, The Notorious B.I.G., and Tupac Shakur for his fellow members who were less familiar with the genre. RM says, "I made a list out of about 50 acts whom we could listen to together. We did ciphers to develop our rapping sensibilities and deliberately watched videos together. that RM had took it upon himself to be the Jack Black of the dorm was because BTS was mired in a uniquely terrible situation in the world of idol music. Big Hit Entertainment had debuted a girl group called Glam a year before BTS, with a docu-series of their formation shown around that time on SBSM TV, now known as SBSM. Teaser trailers for their debut were also released on YouTube. But unfortunately, Glam never caught on in popularity, and Big Hit Entertainment was saddled with a sizable financial burden. When a small to medium-sized entertainment company fails at an idol project, the consequences are more treacherous than anything that can be described in words. As Suga describes the mood back then, I thought the company was going to go under. But to RM, the biggest problem they were facing was that their group, which was about to debut, didn't seem to know in what direction they were supposed to go musically. RM says, Bang Si-hyuk and I would have the members listen to artists like A$AP Rocky or Lil Wayne. But the members who joined later on knew Big Hit as a company created by the Bang Si-hyuk, who had made 2AM and 88 and had worked at JYP Entertainment. But now they were being asked to do hip-hop and rap, which must have presented for them some confusion. The best RM could do was to talk to the debut imminent group about hip-hop as much as possible. Right until their debut, RM, Suga, and Chop's School of Hip-Hop was holding non-stop classes. Some nights, they would come home after rehearsals ended at 11 p.m. and talk about music until 6 a.m. with no sleep. Thankfully, the students of the school were very diligent. V recalls, there was a time when RM, Suga, and J-Hope would sit us four vocalists down and very seriously say, I really think you should listen to this song, or let me teach this to you. RM put so much care into putting together the best songs in hip-hop history that I couldn't possibly say no to him. His care was so palpable that I felt I absolutely had to listen to these songs a lot, even if I happened to dislike them. The classes were slowly paying off. V says, since then, I've come to a point where I'm proud of saying I listen to music the most among all the members. Listening to all that hip-hop back then made me fall in love with it. I would ask the Hines to recommend more music, and I would find my own tracks to listen to as well. V's response has something to do with how the classes were taught. This is how Jimin remembers RM, Suga, and J-Hope's teaching. The Hines would say things like, isn't this the coolest? And show us all the gestures the artists would make themselves as they played us the songs. At first it was just fun and laughter, but there came a point where I saw how it really was the coolest. I thought, this music these Hines are into, this is real music. Jimin adds, that's how we were indoctrinated into the hip-hop mindset. Laughs. The battle for razor-sharp dance. Arg. When asked about BTS's training process before the debut, J-Hope playfully lets out an exaggerated groan before elaborating. The alarm goes off at 10 a.m., and we grab a salad, some bread, and chicken breast and go to the practice studio. Then we practice and review ourselves as we keep screaming arg and start all over again, and then it's ARRRGH again, and all of a sudden, it's 10 p.m. Then we go back to the dorm and sleep ad nauseum. As previously mentioned, Big Hit Entertainment had more trainees than one would expect. From a company of their size, any entertainment company just starting out with 30 trainees would inevitably need to prioritize resources. The practice studios were always crowded, and the trainees had to take turns with lessons. Jin says, when I got to rehearsals after school, there would be 4 studios and the boy trainees would be gathered in one studio. The other studios were being used to prepare Glam for the debut. But with the tepid reception of Glam by mainstream audiences, the company reallocated their resources to BTS. Except this time, the resources were being reallocated under a greater financial strain, which was why, once the BTS members were confirmed to debut, Big Hit Entertainment was forced to release all their other trainees from their contracts. This was how the time and space to train the 7 boys who would become BTS was procured. Their rehearsal times also increased significantly. If RM, Suga, and J-Hope were running a hip-hop school in the dorm after hours. The practice studios were a war zone of dance. It would be fair to say that the members had more trouble getting used to dancing than getting used to hip-hop. With hip-hop, the trio of RM, Suga, and J-Hope at least had similar sensibilities, and the younger members only had to follow the example of the older ones. But the only members back then who were used to dancing were J-Hope and Jimin. RM and Suga hadn't even imagined they would need to learn dance. J-Hope explains, Suga and RM told me once that they thought we were going to become a group like 1TYM and wouldn't have to dance at all. 1TYM was a hip-hop group that included Teddy, who had also produced Big Bang, 2NE1, and Blackpink. They became popular in the late 1990s and early 2000s during the rise of hip-hop in Korea, and it seems RM and Suga had assumed BTS would follow in their footsteps as a hip-hop group with mainstream appeal. Of course, 1TYM, like BTS, emphasized the role of vocalists as well as rappers, and they had some choreographed movement in their acts. But according to Jin, BTS reset their mandate to become an overperformance group. Of the mood in the training sessions at the time, Jin says, the proportion of our training taken up by dance actually wasn't that big in the beginning, but suddenly dance became important and our training time for it went up a lot. We trained really hard, especially in the 2 months before our debut, and there were days when we would be dancing for 12 hours. Anyone reading this book is sure to understand what overperformance means. Not long after, in their performances for the debut song No More Dream, Jimin would execute a move where he would, with a boost from Jungkook, fly into the air and walk across the backs of the other members standing in a line, but the acrobatics was not all that made the overperformance training so arduous. Jin adds, Bang Si-hyuk asked for a little too much back then, laughs. He would be watching playback of our performances on a PC and press spacebar to pause. Then he would critique every angle of our bodies and even our finger placements. He watched our dancing frame by frame. We danced the same choreography for 2 months. As Jin described, BTS practiced the choreography for No More Dream to the point where they were in sync right down to every single frame. 2AM, Glam, and the 4 years it took for Big Hit Entertainment to debut BTS was basically the company catching up to the past 20 years of the industry. It was an endeavor that required much research. The company analyzed the factors that made successful idol groups into hits, and regularly consulted industry experts for their advice. Occasionally, Big Hit would post a reward for anyone in the company who could come up with the best proposal for the production of a successful artist. What Bang Si-hyuk learned in this process was that idols moved to a completely different beat compared to the music industry that came before. Idol music exploded onto the scene with the debut of Seotaiji and Boys in 1992, and with the 1996 debut of HOT. An industrialized production system was put in place. BTS debuted as the idol system approached the 20th year of its golden age. Its first teenage fans were now in their 30s, and as fandom culture developed over the years, the content and standards the fans demanded also became clearer. Kalgrimu, or razor-sharp group dancing, was such content. Fans wanted their favorite groups to create awe-inspiring moments of perfect synchronized dancing. Not only did such perfection bring a visual joy to their fans, but it also served as proof of how hard the members had worked on their teamwork in order to achieve it. But to Bang Si-hyuk, who was part of Korea's first generation of hip-hop and R&B producers at JYP Entertainment, Kalgrimu was not something he was even considering. In hip-hop, dancing was more about emphasizing the personalities of each performer, which led to less pressure for perfectly synchronized movements. But in the world of idol music, Kalgrimu was the law of the land. And while there was an absolute need to follow this law, Jin remembers that even for idol singers, BTS had ended up in the overperformance category of artists. Sure, group dancing is essential for idols, but our dancing was more intense than the usual. As their mandate for reconciling the genre characteristics between hip-hop and idol music became clearer, BTS was required to practice even harder. At night there was a school of hip-hop convened by RM and Suga, who became students during the day at the school of dance alongside the others who were not used to dancing. J-Hope was the teacher in this latter school. He talks of those days. Jimin and I were the only members who had learned dance before we entered the company. I felt like the first thing we needed to do was to help the other members find dancing fun. Outside of our regular training sessions, We occasionally practiced at dawn. It was kind of like the den of rap, where we would put on a beat and try freestyling. Rap had become fun for me during those sessions, and I wanted the same thing to happen with dance for the others. I just put on music and go, no dance, just dance however way you want, that kind of thing. Fortunately, the members were very diligent about their studies in this school. J-Hope continues. We came together a lot better in training than expected. When Suga became obsessed with dance, he would even joke, I don't want to rap anymore. Let's dance. It's hard to believe, I bet, but he and I once went to Hangzhou to learn breaking. Fortunately, the members were very diligent about their studies in this school. J-Hope continues. We came together a lot better in training than expected. When Suga became obsessed with dance, he would even joke, I don't want to rap anymore. Let's dance. It's hard to believe, I bet, but he and I once went to Hangzhou to learn breaking. Laughs. Worlds collide, but even J-Hope, who had opened his own ad hoc dance school in the practice studios, had become completely exhausted 6 months before the debut. He recalls, it was probably the beginning of January 2013. We were so tired, even when we should have been at our most motivated. There was a practice studio where they filmed our dance moves, and we basically lived in there, which was why we would stop talking when we entered there, became really prickly about things. In their quest to become an overperformance group, the members practiced their choreography and took lessons at the same time. In the midst of it all, they also went on specific diets to be at their best possible physical states when on stage, to the point where they were obsessive about the amount of salt they would put on the chicken breasts that they ate for protein. But suffering and worry had more to do with their mental than their physical states. To be affiliated with Big Hit Entertainment, which was not as well known as SM Entertainment, invited a kind of gaze J-Hope felt was overwhelming. When people kept asking us when we were debuting, to a trainee that's really, that question is like a knife to the heart. J-Hope was truly desperate. The fraught journey to his debut reads like a series of desperate moments. He recalls his life's story up to his move to Seoul. I didn't learn a lot at the Hagwon, where I learned to dance, because of the tuition fees. So for the most part during lessons, I would just sit on the Hagwon sofa. Because I loved dance so much, after the lessons, I would keep practicing on my own in the practice studios. The Haings who taught me, especially this one dancer named Bangster, became a kind of teacher to me. He said to me, hey, do you want to come to our practice studio and practice with us? And that's how I joined the dance team Neuron 9. That's where I first came in contact with street dancing. Later, when I signed my contract with Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee, there was no place for me to practice. That was why despite signing the contract, I stayed behind at the Gwangju Hagwon where my dance training was outsourced to. And that's when the our team contacted me, telling me it was time to come up to Seoul. J-Hope, RM, and Suga had to wait 2 years until their debut, and Big Hit Entertainment was barely scraping by at the time due to Glam's failure. The practice spaces were so cramped that someone's singing in one room would carry over to trainees in the room 3 doors down. These circumstances, to the 7 boys who were about to debut, were a source of great anxiety. Suga especially had reasons to be anxious. He was preparing for his debut despite the after effects of a shoulder injury incurred from a traffic accident. He explains, I did all kinds of part-time jobs in 2012, right before our debut was set. My family needed money, so I would teach MIDI, work in a convenience store, and do deliveries. And it was on a delivery where I injured myself on a motorcycle. Suga's voice turns a shade quieter as he recounts the turmoil of those days. The company was in dire straits, and I was worrying my head off as to whether I could continue my life as a trainee. It was really hard for me, the act of living itself. I'd left home pinning all my hopes on debuting. I'd managed to enter this company. I felt so desperate. Jimin had his own issues concerning his debut. He recalls, I had given up a perfectly good life learning dance in high school to come up to Seoul. but no one cared. You could be eliminated after any of the tests they would put us through time to time, which was scary. I was really putting the pedal to the metal then. As Big Hit Entertainment let go of all their trainees save the ones earmarked for BTS, Jimin became more and more anxious that the company could let go of him as well at any time. Unlike RM, Suga, and Chop, the vocalist position members including Jimin had no assurance they would be allowed to debut in BTS. The lack of time for proper training and the obligation to train even harder after his debut was decided put more pressure on Jimin. I wanted desperately to find the reason why I was in the scene, that I wasn't here only because I was forcing it or out of sheer luck, which was why I tried to make one more person like me, to show one more person how much better I was doing. Maybe I was a little impatient. Jimin's desperation at the time resulted in the following episode, a serious one at the time but somewhat cute looking back. I didn't know how to dance like a member of an idol group. I'd never dealt with dancing like this until I became a trainee. So whenever the movements changed, I would pause and memorize the position. You know that Zlayman character, that stick figure with the big head and sticks for a body? I drew every single move and position in that character and memorized them. It made everyone around me laugh. Meanwhile, Jungkook, who was still quite young, was in the process of learning about himself while experiencing dorm life for the first time and undergoing copious amounts of training. My personality completely changed. Being tossed into a place full of strangers made me very shy all of a sudden. I would try to avoid everyone else's shower times when using the bathroom, and I slept in the upper bunk of a bunk bed, but even as I sweated from the heat at night, I wouldn't go down from my bed in case I woke up the Hain sleeping in the lower bunk. I realized then, I'm just very shy. His particular situation was a perfect storm of the combined realities of K-pop, the upcoming debut of BTS, and Big Hit Entertainment's corporate situation. Korean idols normally debut in their late teens, or at the latest, their early 20s. Many of them begin as trainees in their mid-teens under contract with entertainment companies. Jungkook, who would debut at the age of 15, is considered a younger case in terms of both entering an entertainment company dorm and debuting as an idol. On top of his age, there was also the prospect of debuting with older boys like RM and Suga, who had already been active on the hip-hop scene and were obsessed with that genre of music. This meant at the same time as he was training and worrying leading up to his debut, Jungkook had to discover just what kind of person he was deep down. He says, to tell you how bad it was, you know how once you reach middle school, you learn how to use the formal register with your upperclassmen? I didn't even know how to do that. Informal Korean felt natural to me, and I didn't pay much attention to the people around me. But then I entered the dorm and saw how I was coming off. That's when I started using formal Korean. How do I say this? I think I was lacking in my attitude toward other people, in understanding and deference and empathy. And then I met the other members and thought, oh I see, this is how you're supposed to act with others, or I should speak like this too, and learn it how to express my feelings by seeing how it was done. To Jungkook, RM was especially the reason he had decided to sign with Big Hit Entertainment, and J-Hope and Suga were his role models. Jungkook adds, those hunks were on a higher level among the trainees, which made me think, wow, I want to be like them too, or the Hains are dressed so cool and I would buy the same clothes. Laughs. Back then, I think I was having these trivial thoughts more than worrying over whether I was going to debut or not. On the other hand, the three Hains he looked up to were burning up with anxiety as their debut was pushed later and later. The day they would finally get to stand on stage seemed further away than ever, and the group seemed to be going in a direction they hadn't expected. Amid all this, they had to teach hip-hop to the others in the dorm and set the tone for the younger members they were living with. In addition to this, RM, who had become the team leader, had the task of receiving from Myeongseok the big picture about their group. RM remembers, the company never pressured me into doing things, but they did remind me that the smallest things could create big risks and say things like, you have to do well as a leader, or even, you have to wake up the members of your group. This was where worlds were colliding in the dorm. To RM, Suga, and J-Hope, debuting was an immediate problem, whereas the four vocalists who were debuting faster than they had anticipated were still grappling with what it meant to be put out into the world. Jin says, I hadn't really understood what it meant to be an idol. If I'd known beforehand, it would have been easier to get used to that reality. But once I debuted, I was just so busy, and also so happy. Once their debut was set, Jin had to readjust to a trainee life that was very different from the one he had been used to until then. Jin and RM went as far as to have a serious conversation about it at one point. Jin says, the both of us were in agreement that the team had to go up, but the difference between us was that I was wondering if we could pursue our happiness a little first and then think about what was going to happen, while he believed we had to give our all now for the sake of later happiness. While thinking in a slightly different direction, V says as well that he thought differently from the three rapper Hangs. Most people train for years before debuting, so I hadn't even considered that my time would come only after a few months of training. I made sure I attended all the practices, but outside of practice times, I hung out with my school friends a lot. To V, debuting was still far away, and he wanted to experience being a teenager properly, as well as working as a trainee. But V's life abruptly changed once he heard the following from the company: it's time for your debut. You're BTS now. And what about you guys? The more you look back on BTS's preparation for the debut, the more surprising it is that none of them quit in the process, despite being 7 boys from different hometowns and with different values, musical tastes, and time spent in training, coming together to train in less than a year for their debut as a team. J-Hope has some candid thoughts regarding this. We didn't fuse together well at first. Our backgrounds were just so different, and we wanted different things. One would go, I want to become a musician, and another would be like, I just like being on stage. It was hard to calibrate our sense of objectives toward a single goal, but ironically, their debut as BTS being decided also became a decisive factor in their becoming closer to each other. V remembers, while I argued a lot with Jimin, who is my age, and with the other members as well, we worked together so much and talked with each other so much that little by little, we really did feel we were becoming a team. RM making his hip-hop playlists and J-Hope teaching dance were acts stemming from their desperation for the debut. Of how this goal affected them, J-Hope explains, the moment it was decided the 7 of us would debut as a group, that's when our concept as a group fell into place. We knew what we needed to do, what kind of dance and songs we would do, and we talked among ourselves a lot. I have this goal. What about you guys? Shall we do this together? That kind of thing. Their cohesiveness went beyond sincere conversations, spilling over to every aspect of their lives. V says he became closer to the other members through commonalities in their daily lives. We all needed to be on diets, but me and RM weren't very good at it. And since being of kindred spirit is serious business, RM and I would often go off to eat something nice together, or hide things to eat and secretly share them with each other. V's team-building methods were also handy when it came to the younger members. I would sneak outside the dorm with Jimin and we'd eat together and talk together, or go to the Jinjilbang spa with Jungkook or ride sleds when it snowed, and then pretend nothing had happened when the manager would check up on us at the dorm. Laughs. Meanwhile, Jin got closer to V by looking for things they had in common. By the time V and later Jimin entered the company, all the trainees I had been close to had left, except for about 10 who were thought to have potential. I thought it would be too sad if more trainees left, which made me wonder a lot if I should make the effort to get closer. But V liked old manhwa and anime, just like me, so I would go up to him and go, hey, have you seen this one? And that's how we became friends. RM and Suga taught the members hip-hop, J-Hope taught dance, and Jin used whatever ingredients available in the dorm to cook up meals for everyone. In this process, the older members began to understand the young members and the younger members learned from the older ones. Jim speaks of the musical influences and encouragement he received from the other members. The Hangs felt very raw to me. The way they were like, I just like listening to music, so unpretentiously. Suga is a bit stoic and would say things simply and firmly. But then he would also come up to me and say things like, I hope you work hard and do well. I couldn't not like the Hangs, and that's how I became interested in their music. Suga on the other hand, was learning how to communicate with the world through his conversations with the other members. The moment it was decided the 7 of us would debut as a group, that's when our concept as a group fell into place. And we talked among ourselves a lot. I have this goal. What about you guys? Shall we do this together? That kind of thing. J-Hope, it was really hard to respect the fact that we were all different people. I used to be very extreme and trapped in a black and white mindset. My immature mind would think, why is he thinking that way? Shouldn't a normal human being think this way? And eventually I went beyond thinking, that guy is different from me, to accepting that person is just being themselves. It did take a bit of time. The answer to the question of why none of the members of BTS quit during that time may be found in the words of some of the members. Jin sums up the situation back then: adjusting seems to be the right word. Because once I entered the dorm, I realized, I guess this is how I should live from now on. Suga speaks of his pride as a musician. If it weren't for the music, maybe I would have quit partway through. Or if it had been at some other company with a different culture. I released a lot of things in me making music. I don't know how I had so much confidence back then, making all those songs. A lot of them I get embarrassed about, listening to them now. But the people who are obsessed with hip-hop, they have this attitude, I'm the best in the world. You know? Laughs. And of course, we need to hear from the leader of the team. The members were just good people. Very good people. RM continues. The only thing I know how to do is music. I came into this company to make music, and because I believed my work was fundamentally to make music. And because I've been here the longest, I did have the most say in things. To be honest, this made it much easier for me as the leader, and I received so much respect from the other members. It makes me think they've been very good with recognizing and accepting each other. They really treated me well. The long time it took for them to debut was well spent in training and building their trust in each other through much conversation and exchange. And so, the 7 members who had differed in every way began to transform into a team. Just like in lyrics of the song Paldo Gangsan, revealed 4 months after their debut. In the video taken in that very practice studio where they had sung and danced so ceaselessly. In the end it's all Korean. Look above. It's the same sky. We face it could be a bit cringy, but we're the best. We understand each other, right?